Great, thank you. Now interpretation is on. Reminder again, please do select your language, either English or Spanish, and mute original audio. Before we get started, we want to formally begin with a land acknowledgement. We want to formally and with great respect acknowledge that we are on unceded, traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Yokut and Miwok peoples. We recognize that we have played a role in the displacement and also recognize Indigenous peoples' knowledge and that they play a critically important role with their practices and knowledge systems that can advance environmental justice, and we commit to uplifting the vision of Indigenous leaders to build a sustainable future. With that, next slide, please. So before we get started tonight, we'd like to get to know folks who are on the call this afternoon, this evening. So please feel free to drop into the chat your name, where you are joining from, and organization if you are affiliated with any organization. And with that, I'll pass it back to our facilitator for the night, Jasmine.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's webinar. This is a collaboration of CVAQ, CCEJN, and Earthjustice. And I would like to ask the presenters to briefly introduce themselves as well before we get started, starting with me. So hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Martinez, coordinator with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, and I am based in Kern County on Yokut's land. And I'll pass it over to Gus Jr.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Gustavo Aguirre Jr., the Director for Projects here in Kern County for CCEJN out of the Bakersfield office here in Yokut's land. Preferred pronouns, he, him. Thank you, Jasmine.
And Oscar and Byron.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Oscar Espino Padron, and I'm an attorney in the Community Partnerships Program at Earthjustice. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Byron.
Hi, everyone. My name is Byron Chan. I'm also an attorney in the Community Partnerships Program at Earthjustice. I will pass it over to Cynthia.
Hello again, everybody. Cynthia Pinto Cabrera with CVAQ.
Yeah, and that wraps up our intros. Thanks again for joining, everyone. And thanks again to Cynthia for being on our tech tonight. So if you have any questions, please feel free to message Cynthia. So to get tonight started, I'll be giving a joint presentation with Gus Jr. to set some context on the oil industry in the San Joaquin Valley. So the valley is home to 22 giant oil fields, and 4 of the nation's top 7 producing oil fields are actually located in Kern County. Kern has been producing oil since the 1800s, and today it accounts for about 70% of California's oil production and 3% of the country's. Just 2 companies shown at the bottom here operate 90% of our active wells. The San Joaquin Valley is an oil drilling hotspot and has been made a sacrifice zone. And sacrifice zones are places where residents are exposed disproportionately to high levels of toxic contamination in the air, water, and soil, driven by industry, profit, and racist policies. 20 of the 30 most disadvantaged communities in California are located in the San Joaquin Valley. And across the state, people of color represent 9 of 10 residents who live near oil and gas wells. Throughout our own community, you can see wells found near schools and in people's backyards. And several studies have actually showed that race was the most significant factor associated with the siting of polluting sites and hazardous waste. Oil and gas extraction produces air toxics, including volatile organic compounds or VOCs, like benzene and formaldehyde. fine and ultrafine particulate matter, or PM, and hydrogen sulfide. Other risks include water contamination, toxic oil spills, and explosions. The air in the San Joaquin Valley is among the worst in the nation. Our region has had federally recognized unhealthy levels of PM 2.5 pollution for decades. And our largest stationary source contributors are from the oil industry. Just 4 companies make up 50% of PM 2.5 pollution in the San Joaquin Valley. And drilling comes with significant costs paid most by those living near major oil fields, refineries, as well as small operators. Studies have linked proximity to oil and gas with a host of health impacts, including increased risk of asthma, preterm births, and high-risk pregnancies, and in some cases, cancer. Sensitive groups such as children, pregnant women, adults over 65, and people with existing heart and lung diseases are at a higher risk. And the San Joaquin Valley actually has 50% of, our population is made up of at least 50% of these groups. Compared to the national average, children in the San Joaquin Valley are twice as likely to be diagnosed with asthma before the age of 18. And emergency rooms and hospital visits spike during unhealthy days of air pollution, mostly for asthma and heart attacks. CVAQ and CCEJN are a part of a coalition known as Voices in Solidarity Against Oil in Neighborhoods, or VISION, to push for a buffer of at least 3,200 feet from homes and schools for all oil and gas drilling. Despite these impacts, state and local agencies have continued to allow and push for loopholes to support the oil industry. Some examples include the Kern County Ordinance, which attempted to fast track thousands of new wells under a single environmental impact report, and an emissions reduction credit system that allows polluters to buy credits to have additional emissions in communities, and the small producer exemption, which we'll talk about later today. And with that, I'll pass it over to Gus Jr.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jasmine. Gus here again. And yeah, I think what Jasmine went over here quickly is, the region, the overwhelming sources of localized pollution. Oftentimes, elected officials and others like to say, oh, the pollution comes from the outside. And we are well aware that it is not. And in fact, due to the health data out there, a lot of our communities are suffering from this directly, right? Again, quoting Jasmine, like, we're really creating sacrifice zones, right? And so essentially that's why we exist, Central California Environmental Justice Network. And one of our models, we do quite a bit in the environmental justice realm, but one of our models really that is most effective is our IVAN, Identifying Violations Affecting Neighborhoods Network. And essentially it's a hotline where residents are able to make reports, to understand the spider web of how regulatory agencies work, jurisdictional gaps. Residents, don't have the time. Some do have the interest, right? But it's very complex. And so we exist to, receive reports, identify what agencies are the best to send these reports to, and then deal with them on a month-to-month basis where we meet, monthly. And integrated into this model is this a model of community research and community science, where we actually go out there in the communities and do ground truthing, look at the different reports that come in, meet with the reporting parties or the community in this case, and deal with those issues there. And we'll give a little bit of examples of exactly the reports that come in and what we have done. If you could go to the next slide. Quickly, with most of the reports that come in largely are in environmental justice communities or frontline communities. If you are all familiar with the AB 617 program across the state, they are AB 617 communities, and a lot of them are where the reports come from. A lot of the reports coming from the South Kern region here in Kern County, that encompasses Weed Patch Fuller Acres, Vineland, and also the kind of larger communities of Arvin and Lamont, right? And here in the San Joaquin Valley, the largest operating refinery is in Lamont. And so this picture here to the far right is a picture of the flare that oftentimes gets reported by residents, has a number of violations against it currently for this kind of failure to report breakdowns, visible emission violations, etc. Right? And so this is one form of reporting that we do that comes in. And also on the ground truthing piece, if we move to the image to the far left, is a screenshot of a flare camera. And a flare camera is an infrared camera that often is used in industrial technology to be able to identify fugitive emission leaks and leaks in general. And here you're looking at oil and gas infrastructure across the street from Arvin High School. And you see these pipes on top of a tank, and then like this plume of literally of BTEX gases being released from that, right? And this image, again, as we talk about ground truthing, the very center bottom image is image of a low-cost air sensory network that we had deployed in Arvin that put air monitors that were both total VOCs, PM 2.5, et cetera, into the community, both in communities that were far away from oil and gas and communities that were near oil and gas. And so there you see the difference of colors, the orange being communities that are farther away from oil and gas, and blue being communities or households that are, literally fence line to oil and gas production. And so you see a lot more emissions in communities that live in front of that, right? And so therefore, refineries, as we'll talk about here later, and exemptions to regulations are often important because a lot of this infrastructure goes, unless you have this kind of technology, goes unnoticed, right? And so that's why we kind of exist and naturally work with our folks here, Oscar, Jasmine, and everyone else here involved, right? And then just going a little bit over, like, we talked about as far as stationary sources a few slides ago, that really the largest sources, like literally half of those stationary sources come from, a small handful of oil and gas producers, being the largest producers here in the San Joaquin Valley. And so as far as industries in our communities, we're talking about oil and gas being a predominant one that is associated with strong odors, air quality concerns, as you see, the flares, and smoke emissions, right? Visible emissions with frontline community members. Oftentimes the reports that come in are associated with surveys, right? And so a lot of the times with folks that are living near oil and gas production, I've been doing this now will be 8 years at the end of this year. A lot of the symptoms, unfortunately, are the same, right? Eye and nose irritation, tiredness, confusion, dizziness, headaches, dilated pupils, tears, really anxiety, right? Muscle fatigue, insomnia, nerve damage, right? Inflammation of the skin, liver and kidney damage, right? And so a lot of the reports that come in based on just some of these summaries and based on the data that already exists, we're seeing this nexus between these symptoms and potential health effects and living in proximity to oil and gas. And here, as we talk about AB 617 communities, and as we talk about, some of the things, some of the reports that come in, right? Again, we talked about Arvin and Lamont being an AB 617 community, but also a community that we've been working in for a very long time now. A lot of the reports that come out are oil and gas issues, air quality, odors and smells, agricultural related issues such as, pesticide, open ag burning, and then also illegal dumping is also a very big issue in our communities, right? Sometimes, often very easy to see. And so illegal dumping is kind of a go-to for community members. But then from there, we kind of introduce a spectrum of community science and research. And then from there, reports expand out, and we're able to work more closely with community members with all these issues here above us here today. And kind of in closing, through these Ivan reporting networks, through working with community members, through doing, campaigns of environmental justice literacy and climate education with all our partners here. 2 weeks ago, there was a leak that was identified in the Kern Bluffs oil field, which is in eastern Kern County, East Bakersfield. From this, there was one leak that was initially found, was reported to the agencies. Agencies went out there and discovered dozens of oil and gas wells that were idle or abandoned, that were leaking, substantial amounts of methane into the community, right? And then from this led this kind of rolling out, if you will, of regulatory assets to deal with this issue, right? Some of them have been, quote unquote, repaired. They are the regulatory agencies are very worried about saying that they're capped, essentially they're just at this moment repaired. And so from this, there's been other idle wells in central Bakersfield in the financial district, and then also in West Bakersfield that have been found that have been leaking, and ourselves have been out there with flare cameras with our partners that have flare cameras and have identified additional wells that have been leaking and have made reports with that. So that's the spectrum really of what we live here, with residents live here in the community, and some of the issues that are real and literally in our neighborhoods, right? And just quickly to touch on this last slide, I would say more than half of the producers of oil and gas that were found to be guilty of these leaks are fighting the leaks. They're in legal battles against the air district to fight, to say that it's not a leak, right? And a lot of them are in contingency of bankruptcy. And so who bears that cost and who bears that burden is the people, right? And so again, circling back to the sacrifice zones, right? This is not happening in Beverly Hills. This is not happening in downtown San Francisco. It's happening here in Kern County.
Thank you for closing out that presentation, Gus. And we're going to pass it over to the Earthjustice team to share their slides. But as a brief reminder to the audience, please feel free to drop questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We will have an opportunity for Q&A after this presentation, and then move into a little bit more about the local efforts and opportunities that you all can potentially support us with. So Oscar, Byron.
Great, thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Gus, as well. Can you guys see my slides okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. So, so as you heard from Jasmine and Gus, California is a major oil producer, but in addition to being a major oil extractor, it's also one of the biggest refiners in the country. And so this portion of the presentation will focus on petroleum refineries in the San Joaquin Valley and the associated impacts from these operations. So for context, right, California has the third largest number of petroleum refineries after Texas and Louisiana, with a total of 19 refineries scattered throughout the state. And these petroleum refineries are primarily located in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles County, and in the San Joaquin Valley. And petroleum refineries in the San Joaquin Valley are concentrated in Kern County, which, as you've heard from Jasmine, is the largest oil producing county in California. And these refineries are clustered near low-income communities of color here in the region. And there are 4 refineries, right, in the San Joaquin Valley, and those are Alon, Bakersfield, which was built in 1932. There's Kern Oil and Refining in Lamont, which was built in 1934. And then San Joaquin Refining, which was built in 1969, and Tricor Refining, built in 1938. And both of those are located near Bakersfield. And so these are old refineries. As you heard, many were built in the 1930s. And as these refineries continue to age, the risk of a major malfunction increases. And in fact, there are reports and studies showing that, at least 13 of the 20 largest incidents at refineries in the United States that resulted in a significant loss in property damage have occurred since the year 2000. So in the last 20 or so years. And we can expect to see more of these major incidents at these facilities as they continue to reach the end of their useful life, right? Their intended operational timeframe. But even setting aside the age of these facilities, petroleum refineries are inherently dangerous operations that are prone to explosions, fires, and flarings. And several of these incidents have occurred at Kern County area refineries over the years. For example, in January of 2005, there was an explosion at Kern Oil and Refining that killed 1 worker and severely burned 2 others. In November of 2011, a 2.5 million gallon storage tank exploded and caught fire at the Alon Bakersfield refinery that rattled homes and nearby businesses, and it created this massive, black toxic smoke plume that could be visible for miles. And you can see a photo of that tank there on the left. And then in January of 2018, a fire inside a cooling tower at Kern Oil and Refining, shut down roads for hours and required a large emergency fire crew response. And you can see a photo of that incident there on the right, with the cooling tower on fire. And these are just a few examples, right, of many other incidents at refineries in Kern County. And not only are these petroleum refineries hazardous and a threat to public safety, but they're also a significant source of harmful air pollution, both during routine operations, in other words, everyday operations, but also malfunctions that occur at these facilities, such as the incidents that were just described. And in fact, as this chart shows, in 2020 alone, Kern County refineries released several tons of CO, or carbon, NOx, or nitrogen oxides, that contribute to ground level ozone, smog formation, SOx, or sulfur oxide, PM10, or particulate matter that can enter deep into the lungs, and then VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, that include various toxic and cancer-inducing chemicals. And in particular, in 2020, these refineries reported over 146 tons of those VOCs, over 106 tons of NOx, among many, many other pollutants such as ammonia, and the actual amounts, right, of what's being released by these facilities is likely much higher than what's reported by these refineries and reflected on the chart here. And that's because many of the emissions that are reported are based on estimates. that are provided by the refineries rather than actual measurements of pollution coming out of equipment. And these pollutants have a range of health impacts on surrounding communities and residents in the San Joaquin Valley, such as diminished lung function, lung infections in children, lung cancer, irritation of the eyes and skin, among many other health impacts. And so, you might be asking, like, well, who makes sure that this air pollution is controlled? And so the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, which is commonly known as Valley Air, is the regional government agency that's responsible for enforcing air pollution laws at facilities, which includes adopting regulations to reduce and control harmful air pollution at petroleum refineries. And petroleum refineries in Kern County, however, have a history of violating these regulations and really cannot be trusted, right, to comply with these requirements on their own. And that's reflected by the number of notices of violations that have been issued by Valley Air. So between 2017 and 2021, Valley Air issued 80 notices of violations to refineries. And from 2019 to 2020, refineries also self-reported at least 33 instances of non-compliance with various regulations and permit conditions. And unfortunately, much of our regulatory system relies on these self-reported violations to the air districts, right? What they call deviation reports. And these violations involve various rules and permit requirements, such as equipment and storage tank leaks, that are leaking excess amount of toxic pollution, as well as exceedances of emission limits on various equipment, such as flares and heaters. So these are serious non-compliance issues at these facilities that have a ripple effect on surrounding communities and that impact the health and the safety of residents. So that's a brief overview of petroleum refineries in the region and their impacts. And so I'm going to pause here, I think, for questions, and before turning into some of the regulatory efforts to create transparency and to try to reduce emissions at these facilities.
Are there any questions from the audience right now? Feel free to come off the mute as well, or raise your hand.
Looking at the chat, there's no questions in the chat. We do have a raised hand by Rosana, though.
Yeah. Rosana, you want to go?
Hi, this is Rosana Esparza. I have a question about the length of time that a land would need to be idle between the time that it is an oil field until property is built on top of it. In Los Angeles County, it is usually a 25-year waiting period. What is that length of time in Kern County? Is there a difference between the county and the city?
Did anyone want to take that? Oscar, Byron?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rosanna. I don't know the specific, requirement for that, if there is one for the county or for particular municipalities. But generally, right, there is some remediation that has to happen in order to bring up, land to code if, for example, it's being planned for residential use. But off the top of my head, I don't have an answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
We also have a question from Woody Hastings in the Q&A. So mentioned that maybe we will get to this, but communities in the SF Bay area are battling 2 refineries that should be decommissioned, but are trying to convert to biofuel refining, which of course has serious problems associated with it and will continue the public health threat to the surrounding community. And of course, they're trying to call it green, something to be aware of as pressure is placed on these San Joaquin Valley refineries to close. Has there been any intel about these refineries thinking about doing something similar?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, that's an important issue and a trend, right, that is occurring throughout the state at refineries that are looking to take advantage of our low carbon fuel standards, right, to produce quote cleaner fuels. And there are a number of issues with those fuels that we probably don't have time to dig into right now. But in terms of Kern County refineries, Alon Refinery is one of the facilities that is converting to produce biofuels. Granted, even though they're changing the feedstock, right, instead of using crude oil, you know, they're using fats or other types of oils, animal and plant oils, to produce the fuels. You know, those fuels are still mixed with traditional petroleum distillates and fuels in order to bring those then to the market. So many traditional, you know, petroleum-derived fuels are still used at these facilities. You know, it's still a highly toxic and volatile process. You know, biofuel production is also you know, subject to increased risk of explosions and increased flaring, given that it requires a tremendous amount of hydrogen in order to produce those biofuels. And that hydrogen, of course, is generated through fossil, you know, or natural gas. So it's an extremely, you know, carbon intensive and dirty process. But yes, so Alon is one of those facilities, and it's definitely something to, you know, keep an eye on as other refineries face, you know, increased economic pressures and are looking to expand, right, their income streams. So I hope that answers your question.
And thanks for taking that one, Oscar. And one thing that I will add to is we are seeing refineries be an industry of interest for the use of carbon capture and sequestration, or CCS. And that is another tool that these industries are using to keep refineries going throughout the state. So definitely seeing a lot of different ways we have to fight back to start phasing out a lot of these industries. I'm gonna pass it back to you, Oscar, to continue the presentation, unless there are any more questions from the audience that we can answer.
Great, thank you, Yasmin. So, so given the significant air pollution and other hazards that are presented by refineries, in 2017, you know, California enacted, well, the legislature passed and Governor Brown signed Assembly Bill 1647. And this law requires refineries to install, operate, and maintain fence line air monitoring systems, and for air districts such as Valley Air to install, operate, and maintain community air monitoring systems near refineries. And under the law, both the fence line and the community air monitoring systems, you know, must be installed and online by January 1st, 2020. And these systems must collect real-time data about emissions that are crossing the fence line and entering communities. and to provide that information and data to the public. And the purpose of the law, right, what the law aimed to do was to assist in identifying sources of pollution at petroleum refineries and opportunities to reduce those emissions. It also aimed to inform surrounding communities and regulators when pollution crossing the fence line reaches hazardous levels, and to allow residents to take proper precautions. Unfortunately, after Assembly Bill 1647 became law in 2017, and you can see the flow of events here on this timeline, Valley Air delayed taking any action. It was only after a failed last-minute legislative effort by the oil industry in September of 2019 that Valley Air finally scheduled its first working group meeting. That was 2 years after the law was passed. And that working group meeting was scheduled in October of 2019. And the agency then rushed to get rules approved by December of 2019. And that was just weeks before the January 1st, 2020 deadline for these monitoring systems to already have been developed, installed, and operating. And so clearly, Valley Air did not make this a priority, caved to industry pressures. And there were many issues that were raised by community members and groups about deficiencies in the rule due to the agency's rushed process and desire to appease industry that was very much against implementing these requirements in the region. And one of the issues that was raised was that these rules contained exemptions for refineries in the region that were, quote, not actively processing crude oil, even if they were still engaged in other activities that were generating pollutants and creating hazards. And that exemption, that crude oil exemption, allowed Tricor and Alum Refinery to avoid compliance whatsoever with the state law mandated requirements. It also exempted refineries with a capacity of under 40,000 barrels per day and allowed them to ignore monitoring various pollutants, even if the refinery released significant quantity of those pollutants. And so in 2020, several groups challenged the Air District's rules in court. And in 2021, the Fresno Superior Court issued a judgment requiring that the Air District remove those exemptions. And so now the agency is in the process, right, of revising these rules. They've been reopened to remove the exemptions. And so this is an opportunity as well to push the Air District in the right direction to create the strongest rules possible that provide for transparency and that assist, right, in reducing emissions and achieving the purpose of this law. And so that's kind of where we are right now. The Air District is still in the process of vetting the issues and seeking input on what should be incorporated into this revised regulation. And so I'll stop there and I'll turn it back to Jasmine.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. And one reason why we did want to just provide this overview is there is an upcoming workshop at the end of the month on June 28th at 4 p.m. On these rules. So we do want to share this to all, encourage you to invite community members to attend, voice their concerns about refineries in their communities. And we have also created a public comment toolkit, which encompasses some of the asks that we've compiled as CVAQ and Earthjustice to send in to the district. And this outlines a lot of the ways that they could tangibly strengthen the rules. This includes monitoring for all of the pollutants, removing those exemptions. And we also have like a draft, like public comment template for community members if they need that. It is available in English and Spanish on a website page that we created for this webinar. We'll also be posting the webinar recording to this page, and feel free to share that with any members of your organizations as well. And yeah, so I'll just take it back to our space and open it up for any questions just about this workshop, any of the presentations, refineries or the oil industry in general. And we can drop the information for the district notice and the public comment page right now. Did anyone?
Yeah, and we'll also post this recording on our website. I think I might have missed out if you said that, Jasmine, but I'll post it on our website as well. But right now I don't see any hands raised or any comments, so feel free to drop anything in the chat.
Yeah, we'll leave it open for a couple of minutes for folks that may have questions or maybe typing them out. I'll also drop the workshop information as well. But overall, I hope this was informative. Oh, I see that we got a question in the chat. So from Cesar, are exemptions only at the state level, or does this happen locally too? And while I grab the workshop info, can someone take that question?
I can jump in unless, I don't know, Byron, if you wanted to answer that. So.
Sure, I can take a go at it. The exemptions that Oscar was talking about were just at the local level. And the argument that community groups made in overturning that exemption at the local level was that the state law didn't allow for those exemptions. So to answer your question, it just happens at the local level, as these local air districts are, I'm using air quotes, implementing state law.
I hope that answered your question. Any other questions from the audience? And if not, I just encourage you all to, again, attend that workshop, voice your concerns about refineries and or other oil and gas operations. There may also be, or there's also another question from Cesar. If these exemptions are local and their inspectors are frontline inspectors, do they have to report findings to the state, or do they not report?
So I can take that follow-up question, is that the inspectors are local inspectors. So they're not state-wide inspectors. They are just inspectors from the local air district. So any reports or findings that they would come up with or discover would primarily go to the local air district. There might be ways of having state oversight of those local findings, but in the majority of cases, it just goes to the local air district.
Okay, were there any other questions? If not,
I guess maybe, sorry, I could just add on one more thing and to that answer, and your question is partly why local advocacy is so important, because a lot of these practices from regulatory agencies that we see are so harmful to frontline communities are made at the local level. And while state advocacy is important, I think on the ground, local level advocacy is really where the rubber hits the road and where a lot of decisions are being made that affect people's everyday lives, as has been described in many of these presentations. So just another plug based off of your question that these workshops and these local programs are really important to participate in if you're available.
yeah, thank you for that comment, Byron, and encourage you all to attend this workshop, and a potential other public workshop that may be of interest is regarding the leak detection and repair rules of oil and gas facilities as well throughout the valley. Although they haven't set a public workshop date, they have confirmed that there will be another opportunity. So we will also share that information out and make that available on the same website page for this webinar. So with that, just want to thank everyone again for making time to join, and hope you have a great evening and that we see you all on the workshop.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Take care.